Welcome to Third Eye Weekly. Joining us today is Willy Shih, Harvard Business School professor who has co-authored the book Producing Prosperity: Why America Needs a Manufacturing Renaissance. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So many people now are talking about what are the best ways to bring manufacturing back to the United States, and sort of help resurge a middle-class labor union again. That had once existed. However, your book kind of makes it clear that it's a mistake to look at manufacturing and look at labor as the main force we want to bring manufacturing back to the US. Can you explain a little bit more into what you think is the main focus in trying to bring manufacturing back to the US?
Well, I think the main challenge with manufacturing is kind of not only labor costs, but cost of all the factor costs, right? And we saw a lot of outsourcing, particularly to China, offshoring to China, especially after 2001, especially after 9/11, where there was an economic downturn. The labor cost differential between the US and China was so big that the way a lot of companies made their numbers is they would offshore production. They would move production over there. And of course, that led to the loss of a lot of jobs because manufacturing is a great source of good income jobs for people with maybe not the highest levels of education. I mean, you still need to have a lot of competencies and so on. But manufacturing jobs have been the route to the middle class for a large part of the population. Okay, and that's actually why we like them so much. There's actually more wage compression with manufacturing jobs. In other words, more people in the middle than you have with service jobs. Service jobs that have people who will be doing high-end hedge funds at one end making a lot of money, and then you'll have people cutting the grass who are not making a lot of money. So manufacturing has always been kind of attractive in that regard. But I think if you look at what makes a good location choice, it's a number of factors. Okay, one is labor cost is part of it, but it's also things like labor force availability, where do all the components for the things that I want to make come from? Okay, so for example, if you look at electronics manufacturing these days, what China has done over the last 15 years is they've captured the component supply chain for, if you're using an iPhone, right? All those components pretty much are made in China now or nearby, maybe Taiwan, maybe a few in Japan or Korea, but China has by and large captured the supply chain. Okay, so if you want to make iPhones, you really are advantaged if you're going to do it in China. And if you wanted to make them in the US, you would have to ship all those components over here and then find enough people to assemble them so that on the first weekend you could sell 10 million of them. Okay, which is another problem, right? We have now moved into an era where 10 million people want to buy an iPhone on the first weekend. You couldn't assemble a labor force with that many people to assemble that many iPhones to get into the pipeline. So there's a lot of complicated factors about what can and cannot be made in the US anymore. Our view is that it's really important to make it not only from the standpoint of providing middle-class jobs, but when you make product, it's manufacturing is really closely tied to your ability to do innovation as well, right? So, because early on when you're launching a product, being close to production allows a lot of interaction between the engineers and the people who are producing it. And when production processes aren't mature, that's a time when you really need a lot of that interaction, right? So we think it's important for a number of reasons, but it's going to be tough bringing some of those things back.
So speaking along those same lines, how do you feel manufacturing can maintain technology platforms that will continue to spur technological innovations?
Well, you see, especially in a lot of areas, take semiconductors, for example. When you're really at the leading edge of technology, and current semiconductor technology, you're dealing with devices that might have dimensions on the order of 5 atoms wide. Okay, and so there's a lot of understanding of physics when you're designing the devices, and when you put them into production, you're going over the factory all the time because you're experimenting with it, right? So the ability to design the leading edge devices is closely coupled with the ability to manufacture them or to produce them. You see that also in a lot of biopharmaceuticals, for example, right? When you're making a new drug, the ability to make a couple milligrams at a lab scale is very, very different from the scale up to produce a 1 year supply for the world's population. Okay, so that scale up in itself requires a lot of know-how, requires a lot of knowledge, requires a lot of experimentation, right? So there's a lot of going back and forth between the people who develop it and the people who produce it, right? So that's why if you lose the ability to manufacture biopharmaceuticals, then it's gonna wrap back on your R&D capabilities, because a key part of developing the drug is developing it so that you're able to manufacture it as well. So they're closely linked, and we think if you let go of those links, that becomes a problem down the road.
And you were making it clear that it's been really complex in what are these industries that can create and produce here in the U.S. versus exporting. What are some of the distinct sort of elements or from an industry that must can create back in the U.S. versus exporting?
So one way of thinking about the question you ask is, how tradable is the good that I'm going to make? Okay, and tradability is really to what extent do I need to make something nearby, close to the market or close to where I'm doing my development, as opposed to I'm able to ship it a long distance. So if you think about kind of the tradability equation, it's a combination of how long does it take to get product from the manufacturing location? How easy is it for me to do coordination between my R&D operation and my production operation? Okay, now we've made a lot of that a lot easier over the past 2 decades with inexpensive air transportation. People can fly back and forth. In fact, if you work for somebody like Apple, you're going to spend half your life at factories in China. Okay, so we made a lot of that easier. I think one of the things that we're seeing today, and the reason a lot of people are kind of hopeful for a resurgence of American manufacturing is, U.S. Wage rates have been pretty stagnant for the last 15 years, whereas we've seen labor costs in China go up 15, 20, 30% a year every year since about 2006. It started going up, right? So whereas China used to be 1/10 or 1/20th the cost of the U.S., depending on what kind of production workers you were looking for, it might have been 1/20th of the cost. Today, China is only about 1/3 the cost of the U.S. And now when you factor in how long does it take me to get my product from China to the U.S., you say, well, if I have inventory in the pipeline, and let's say it's on a container ship and it gets stuck in Long Beach because of a strike or something, it might be in the pipeline for, minimum of 21 days, maybe 30 days, maybe even longer. Okay, for some goods, that's okay. Okay, but for some goods, especially things that may that I'm just going to sell at retail, that may be fashion goods, for example. You know, the worst thing that can happen to a retailer is have something to go out of style or something that's the wrong product that isn't selling, and then have 4 weeks of supply coming at me. Okay, things like that, it might make sense to bring them back to the U.S. to make. Okay, and we're seeing that, you know, in some areas. I think it's a little spotty though, but we're seeing some of that come back to the U.S. because you know, it pays to be closer to market. Okay, but are we going to see iPhones assembled in the U.S. or iPads or things like that? Google tried to assemble the Moto X phone in Texas. Okay, but they had to bring all the parts here, and by the time they were bringing all the parts here, it cost as much to ship all the parts, which had to be carefully packed, compared to they just assembled them in China and shipped the completed phones here. So a lot of things don't work. Some things do work. A lot of things don't work. I think we're also looking at, I mean, if you look at the Department of Commerce Bureau of Labor Statistics, they say, well, manufacturing employment has gone up. Well, if you look at those BLS numbers, you know, half of manufacturing employment in this country is in transportation equipment. So that's auto industry, aerospace. Okay, and you know, we have seen auto industry employment go up. Right, there's actually been, you know, the auto industry is having a very good year this year, and last year was also a very good year. A lot of that was because demand was really depressed with the global economic crisis. But the other thing that's happening is you see companies like Volkswagen moving to Tennessee, or BMW increasing production in South Carolina, or Daimler putting production in Alabama, and you know, some of the Japanese car makers, you know, Honda, for example, I think last year, because costs in the U.S. have been relatively stable, I think they're now exporting more cars from the U.S. than they are importing into the U.S. from Japan. Right, so those kind of big numbers bias things, but there's still a lot that's going to lower cost regions. A lot of stuff is going out of the U.S. into Mexico. If you go down to the area right around the border, like Juarez, there's a boom in auto parts manufacturing there, and so there's a lot of stuff that's getting offshored out of the U.S. In the auto parts industry. You know, more and more components are coming in from abroad. So it's a mixed story, but it all gets down to kind of the tradability equations. I think about it. You know, the relative cost of transport, cost in both my inventory pipeline and the time and the coordination cost of having stuff produced far away versus locally. But then also, what does the supply chain look like? Can I get all the stuff that I need to assemble my product locally? And so a lot of things, if it's smartphones or notebook computers or tablet computers, it's not going to come back to the U.S. in my opinion, which is too bad, right? Because we invented all these things and we developed them here, but those things are going to be tough.
Interesting. Well, that's just about all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for talking with us, Willie. It was
Sure thing. Okay, good talking to you as well. Thank you for having me.